A lot of people ask me, what if The Force Awakens was good? Like, really good? For a long time I've been putting off answering that question, but the time is finally here. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so there are two elephants in the room that need to be addressed as soon as possible. One, yes, this is kind of a rip-off of the belated media series on the prequels, although belated media certainly didn't invent the idea of speculative rewrites of poorly received movies, and it's always been an amateur passion of mine. Second elephant is my casual use of the phrase poorly received. See, unlike with the prequels, people are divided on the sequels. Some people think they are good, perhaps even as good as the original trilogy, while other people think they are terrible, perhaps even as bad as the prequel trilogy. Moreover, there are some people out there who, for example, hated Rogue One but loved The Last Jedi, while there are other people out there who loved Rogue One but hated The Last Jedi. And then there's Rich Evans, the only person in the world who liked Solo.
Based on what I've just heard, you know what's going to be really surprising? I kind of loved it.
Not even liked it, you loved it?
Well, kind of.
So since I'm starting off with a presumption in this video that episode 7 was not good, I'm going to attempt to justify that as I rewrite the film, and therefore this is going to be half rewrite and half review. I hope you enjoy, and even if you don't agree with me that The Force Awakens was a bad film, I hope you can at least get some enjoyment out of my rewrite. Just view it as my own personal fanfiction, rather than an attack on the film. And I of course welcome all constructive criticism in the comments below. So the first and most obvious problem with the plot is that it's a remake of A New Hope. I'm not criticizing this because it's lazy, but rather because it completely ruins the original trilogy. To enjoy this film and the original trilogy, you have to accept that Luke went from somebody living on an isolated planet to being a galactic hero. The Jedi went from being nearly extinct to returning. Twice, the heroes destroyed 2 massive doomsday weapons, and ultimately the evil empire was defeated. And then 30 years after these events, Luke has now become a recluse on an isolated planet. The Jedi are dormant and approaching extinction. A massive doomsday weapon was assembled and able to effortlessly wipe out 7 major planets, and a new empire has arisen with the ability to create the aforementioned doomsday weapon and reduce the existing government to nothing. Now, some of these things in isolation may not be bad. Obviously, things need to have disintegrated a bit for this film to even have a plot. But you put them all together and I'm comfortable calling that a serious problem, because the original trilogy may as well not have happened. We need a Star Wars Episode 7 that won't take anything away from the events of Episodes 4 through 6. There are 2 other aspects of the Star Wars universe that this rewrite will focus on quite heavily. The first is world building. Something I hope you'll notice is that the galaxy I present here should feel a little more lived in than the galaxy we're presented in the movie franchise. In my head, there is a much bigger galactic context to this rewrite, which, while not presented in its entirety, does inform much of what I've written here. This leads me on to the second feature of this rewrite, numbers. These Star Wars films have no appreciation for numbers. Countless droids, countless clones, endless death stations, and at the end of the day, the fate of the universe seems to ultimately be decided by the actions of approximately a dozen people. This is a major issue, because in a world where numbers feel meaningless, victories and defeats feel meaningless too. I mean, when we can go from the Resistance destroying Starkiller Base, which you'd assume the First Order have sunk a lot of their resources into, only to find out the very next film that apparently the First Order rules the entire galaxy, it makes that victory meaningless. Why should I care about losses and victories? Why does it matter how many star systems have fallen? Ultimately, some guy will betray somebody or some other guy will blow something up and that's it. This galaxy of apparently over 100 quadrillion people has passed from one hand to the other. So again, during this trilogy, I hope you'll be able to appreciate how the actual numbers involved in this galactic conflict aren't just glossed over. Oh, one final point. I'm not focusing on the expanded universe much. I agree that these films couldn't avoid treading on the previous canon's toes, so might as well just start over. However, I have used the expanded universe as a template. Anyway, that's all the housekeeping out of the way, so I now present Episode 7, The Force Awakens, with occasional asides from me to justify my decisions. Oh, and one final thing. I can't really write dialogue, so the dialogue presented should be taken with a grain of cringe salt. I'm not going to rewrite the opening crawl, but I would change it slightly. Mine would communicate first and foremost that the Republic has been restored, but that the galaxy is still rife with conflict. In all parts of the galaxy, conflicts continue, and it is only a matter of time before those who oppose the new Republic are united. Obviously, there'd be some flowery language in there, but I'm just sticking to the basics. We start off with Poe Dameron looking down on Jakku from a spaceship. The elevated position looking down on the planet communicates that the established government, which I refuse to call the Resistance because that's a stupid name for an established government, is dominant. This is in contrast to the original film, where our first shot shows the looming shadow of a massive First Order ship, thus implying that the First Order is already supreme. He talked into his walkie-talkie, saying that there doesn't appear to be any rebel activity going on. At this point, we can infer that we are witnessing the bad guys, since we associate the name rebel with the good guys. Poe zooms in with his camera and spots a large convoy moving through the desert. The camera pans to several men behind behind him, gearing up as he says he's heading down to the planet. Suddenly, the film cuts to a figure in an old rebel helmet before they lift it up and we see it is a woman, Rey, scavenging. She ascends from the ship's wreckage to see Poe Dameron's ship flying across the desert. Poe touches down and his elite team of fighters file out of the ship behind him. They get to a high point overlooking the convoy. Poe uses his binoculars and observes that they're just local warlords, but anomalously well supplied for local warlords. He directs his men to encircle the group, despite their protestations that local warlords are below their pay grade. As his men move into position, they are slowly picked off by hidden militants, leading to Poe's capture. One militant notices that he's a captain and therefore they should wait until the leader returns before killing him. Poe asks irreverently who exactly the leader is. Cut to Kylo Ren and a group of soldiers approaching an industrial complex in the desert. We see Rey returning with what she's scavenged, and we find out that she works for a junkyard dealer who uses scavenged material to produce weapons and transports. Obviously, we see him mistreat Rey because sympathy. Kylo enters the compound and begins to negotiate the sale of weapons with the dealer. He explains that the weapons might not be very good, but Kylo assures him that for their purposes, cheap weapons will suffice. This is a different First Order to the one we see in the original film. This First Order is struggling to get by with cheap, low-quality weapons and ships. Rey is watching all of this when suddenly a hammer falls from some scaffolding, almost killing her. She somehow senses the hammer falling and is able to catch it before it hits her head. Kylo stops, as if he senses something, before continuing the conversation. The dealer assures Kylo that with these weapons, he'll be the most powerful warlord in Jakku, but Kylo says that his organization's aspirations are much greater than that. Cut to Poe being held in a makeshift prison in a secluded cave, surrounded by a ragtag group of misfits. This is the First Order, so like I say, this is a very different First Order, and I'll take a minute to explain it now, even though in the film this will of course be explained or implied at other points. So, when the Empire was defeated, there were millions of people whose entire job had been to fight for the Empire. They were professional killers, and as such, when the Galactic Empire collapsed, these former stormtroopers jumped into the most logical jobs: contract killing, piracy, mob enforcement. Many of them held on to their old armor, even while it became tattered and broken. Eventually, massive numbers of people were engaged in these illegal activities, and meanwhile, much of the galaxy was descending into local conflict. The Republic had only had limited success combating this rise in crime and insurgency. Now, Snoke in this version is pretty simple. He was an individual from a wealthy family who became radicalized and started channeling his wealth into organizing various warlords and criminals around himself and his own philosophical and political ideals, called the First Order. So that's the First Order. They don't have brand new pristine armor. They don't have an organized military structure. They definitely don't have a planet-sized space station. Some of them are wearing stormtrooper armor since it's handed down to them by their fathers, but it's tattered and broken. Others are just wearing generic military armor from wherever they could find it. Poe is able to tell that these guys clearly aren't anything close to a professional army, and asks who they are. One trooper sits down and explains that they are the First Order, to which Poe responds that he's never heard of them. Poe asks for the trooper's name, and the trooper identifies himself as Finn. Yes, Finn, not FN something something. The idea that this organization would have the infrastructure and discipline to strip people of their names and identities is absurd. Moreover, the way Finn is presented in The Force Awakens annoys me. He has been apparently raised since birth to kill. He no longer even considers himself to have an identity. He's a human-turned-automaton killer, and yet he switches allegiance just because he doesn't like blood. It's ridiculous. In this version, the First Order have fun. They are quite personable. They're playing cards and drinking. They are people like anybody else who believe they are fighting for a righteous cause. Poe interrogates these ideals and asks if they want to be a successor to the Empire. Finn responds that it will be different, since the Empire was about suppressing everything, while the First Order seeks only to suppress what's evil. He explains that he and his family were victims of trafficking, and that it was the First Order that rescued him and brought justice to his captors. Nonetheless, the rest of his family is still out there, enslaved or dead, and the Republic has done nothing to help them, but they've helped the planetary elite subjugate freedom fighters. Poe becomes angry at this and says that it's easy to talk about solving all of the galaxy's problems, but it's harder to actually do it. He points to a drunken recruit to illustrate the point that these men aren't up to the task. The drunken recruit becomes incensed with rage and goes to shoot Poe, but Finn, obeying the command to wait until Kylo's return, knocks the gun, causing it to damage the lock. Poe is therefore able to break out, and during a scrappy struggle, he escapes the compound. During the struggle, a fire starts with Finn left unconscious on the floor. Poe drags Finn out, saying that it's only because Finn saved his life. He then steals a transport and rides off. Kylo consults with Snoke via hologram about the fact that he senses somebody is strong with the Force in the facility. Snoke instructs Kylo to wipe out the entire community if necessary to ensure that this Force-sensitive person is destroyed. Kylo seems reluctant, but ultimately agrees. Meanwhile, Rey is working hard in the junkyard, fixing some ships. However, she sees Poe sneak over the wall and he gets her attention. He tells her that he needs to escape and will give her Republic credits if she rescues him. Rey says that Republic credits are no good to her and asks instead for his gun. Poe agrees and they get into the Millennium Falcon. Poe is unable to fly it as it is so old, but Rey can fly it since she has worked with the ship before. The junkyard manager notices them escaping, but as he goes to tell Kylo about it, Kylo cuts him down with his lightsaber. Anyway, I want to take this opportunity while Rey is flying the Millennium Falcon to talk about the whole Mary Sue thing. I'd say the criticism has mixed validity. The ease with which Rey uses the Force bothers me. She does a Jedi mind trick and a Force grab without any meaningful training at all, so I agree with that being a problem. However, her being a good pilot seems fair enough to me. She's spent a lot of time around ships, so she could have flown some in her time, and it makes more sense than Luke being a good pilot. On board the Millennium Falcon, Rey insists that they can't just leave Jakku, as she is waiting for her parents and she is confident they will return. Poe agrees to drop her off at a nearby village where there is a local landlady who is friendly to the Republic. He drops her off and then flies away. Kylo Ren stands in the destroyed junkyard, surrounded by dead bodies. Finn and the few other soldiers who survived Poe's escape show up, and Finn is visibly distressed by the destruction. Kylo tells Snoke that he believes the Force-sensitive person has been killed as he can no longer sense their presence. Snoke says that this is good and declares that the Republic will be blinded. He instructs Kylo to plunder the junkyard and lead a force towards a nearby village to subjugate the local warlords there. Rey heads into a bar and meets Maz Kanata, who takes her aside and talks to her. Rey asks who just dropped her off, and Maz explains that he's with the Republic. Rey responds a bit coldly to this, and Maz laughs, saying that she understands why people feel this way about the government. They talk about bringing all known planets together in one giant union, but they can't comprehend a world where people butcher each other for being from the wrong village. Rey agrees with this, but is noticeably saddened by it. Maz Kanata explains that it wasn't always like this. It used to be that from every planet there was a hero, a Jedi. From all over the galaxy they emerged, and they kept peace for the Republic. Unfortunately, after the Republic fell, the Jedis were destroyed, and there have not been many since. The ways of the Force have been lost, but Maz adds, there has been an awakening. And if the last great Jedi Master returned, he could potentially rebuild the Jedi Order. Outside the village, Kylo Ren and his troops confront a local band of warlords. Kylo commands the warlords to submit and join the First Order, but the warlords claim that Jakku will never submit. Kylo proceeds to force choke a warlord and says that all will submit. Rey asks whether Maz Kanata knew Luke Skywalker. Maz responds that there was once a time when everyone felt like they knew Luke Skywalker. He was a galactic hero. She adds that she doesn't know if there are any heroes anymore. And just as Rey is asking what happened to them, there's a large explosion outside. Fighting has broken out between the First Order and the warlords. Rey is reasonably competent with her weapon, but she isn't just one-shotting everybody. She starts to run away and Kylo zeroes in on her, sensing the Force. He runs after her and the two chase through the streets until, just as Rey is on the verge of being caught, Poe shows up with the Millennium Falcon and rescues her. As Kylo watches the ship escape, he makes a call to the junkyard and instructs his pilots to fly all available ships in pursuit of the Falcon. There's a brief space fight where things don't go too well for the protagonists. This isn't the universe where you can outfly pilots who have been raised from birth to fly ships in a ship you've never flown before. However, they are fortunately saved by a team of Republic fighters who have come to help out Poe, and they are led by none other than Han Solo. Implying a reasonable passage of time, Kylo is now on a troop transport being chastised by Snoke. Not only did Kylo fail to kill the Force-sensitive girl, but in attempting to capture her, he lost several fighters, which were hard to procure. General Hux then says that his efforts have been more successful, having secured an alliance with several large separatist groups, and also formed an alliance with the space pirate Captain Phasma, who silently steps into view. Snoke reiterates his disappointment with Kylo and says that Luke Skywalker must be killed lest he train a new generation of Jedi. Snoke says that he has foreseen a great awakening of Force-sensitive people unless they are able to crush the light side now. Meanwhile, Rey and the gang arrive at Biss, which is a deep core planet that has become the new capital for the Republic. I kind of like the idea of it being dissimilar to Coruscant in that it is more suburban as opposed to Coruscant's massive skyrises. They land and are greeted by Lord Santekka and Princess Leia. Poe introduces Rey and explains that she saved his life, and Han chimes in that she's also a good pilot. Han walks Rey back to his house, where she can stay in his guest accommodation, and Rey explains that she can't stay long as she still has to return to Jakku. Han asks if she has somebody waiting for her back there, and Rey says that she's waiting for them. Han looks up and says that sometimes when somebody is gone, you have to believe that they're coming back. We then of course see Kylo, being told by Snoke that Rey was saved by a fleet led by Han Solo. Kylo says that Han means nothing to him, so that's why he did not sense him. However, Snoke says says that Han should mean something to him, as killing Han will be his final test to prove he is loyal. The next morning, Rey and Han arrive at the government square and run into Poe, who says that he's on his way to the Iceno system. Through conversation with Han, Rey finds out that the three major conflicts in the galaxy are the Mimban conflict, the N26 conflict, and the Inner Rim conflict. As they continue walking, they encounter another senator, we'll call him South Arden, who, having overheard some of the conversation, remarks that he's heard that Rey is from Jakku, and she's certainly very privileged to be able to sit in on conversations pertaining to galactic security when she is cut from such rebellious cloth. At this moment, Leia appears and points out that peace is only going to come by listening to the experiences of those who feel let down by the Republic. Lord Santeca says that Senator Arden means well, but that his commitment to the resistance makes him overzealous. Rey quips back that they don't know the meaning of the word resistance. They've never had to resist hunger, exploitation, or death. This shuts everybody up, and the group move on to the Jedi Temple. While there, Rey checks out a display featuring Luke's lightsaber. However, suddenly several guards at the museum begin to kill the senators. During a crossfire between Republic soldiers, including Han and Chewie, and the guards, the display for Luke's lightsaber is broken. Rey grabs it and is able to kill several of the guards, neutralizing the danger. They try to capture one of the assassins, but he jumps out the window to his death. Han, having picked up on Rey's skill with a lightsaber, takes her to the Jedi archives on a distant moon. Poe contacts Rey and says he heard about her success in defeating the assassins and that he's impressed. When they reach the temple, Han explains that the Jedi were once powerful and stood in opposition to the Sith. However, after a young Jedi betrayed the Jedi Order, an evil empire dominated the galaxy. Even after the empire was defeated, there were those who remained loyal and fought on, and there were those who wanted their own autonomy free from the Republic. Han says that he still believes that the galaxy can be saved and that the violence will end someday. Rey asks who the Jedi was that betrayed the Republic. Cut to Kylo Ren monologuing. It's a very similar monologue to what we see in the original film about how he is struggling to stay strong and wants to finish what Darth Vader started. We then see Vader's burnt helmet answering Rey's question. We then cut to a group of people ransacking an old Jedi temple, joking around having a good time. Suddenly, a group of Republic forces come in and shoot them all, and we see that they are led by Poe Dameron. Poe interrogates one of the survivors and asks why they are ransacking the temple and whether it pertains to the whereabouts of Luke Skywalker. Suddenly, we see a figure appear, Kylo Ren. He tells Poe that there are greater Jedis than Luke Skywalker, holding the Darth Vader mask in his hand. He grabs Poe with the Force and says, "You spoke to her. You know where she is." He releases him and leaves the room, instructing the troopers to kill Poe. However, at the last minute, one of the troopers shoots the rest and reveals himself to be Finn. Kylo approaches the Jedi library and gets a message from Snoke asking him whether he was able to retrieve the artifact from the temple. Kylo says that he did, and moreover, he was able to locate Rey, whom he is heading to right now, and he adds that Han Solo is with her. Snoke instructs him to kill both of them without hesitation. Meanwhile, in the Jedi library, Rey is practicing fighting while Han watches her. He observes that she'll need a teacher if she wants to get very good, which would be helped by finding out where Luke is. Suddenly, Kylo shows up, stabbing Han and pushing him out the way, before easily besting Rey and abducting her. Finn and Poe return to Biss, explaining their defeat at the hands of the First Order, and Poe says that Kylo went to the temple to steal Darth Vader's mask. Santeca asks who Finn is and points out that every time Poe leaves, he returns back with some random person from the Inner Rim. Finn identifies himself and explains that actually, they weren't sent to pick up Darth Vader's mask, but instead to attain a map. Leia asks what the map is for, when suddenly, Han Solo staggers in and collapses, saying that Kylo has taken Rey. Kylo interrogates Rey, and we have a scene that plays out very similar to the original film. He talks about how he could train Rey, and also reveals his face for the first time. Then we see Kylo's ship flying over a large army, made of First Order fighters and other separatist groups, and commanded by Hux. Hux confronts Kylo about the fact that he was told to kill Rey on sight. The two argue intensely until Kylo reveals that he believes Rey has the secret to Luke's whereabouts. Hux accuses Kylo of pulling the wool over their eyes, since he never has to defend his actions rationally, but can always just appeal to the Force. Snoke instructs Hux to focus on his own command and cautions Kylo that he has until after the forthcoming battle to interrogate Rey, then he must kill her. Hux adds to kill her whether she reveals the location of Skywalker or not. Snoke then asks Kylo whether he did at least kill Han Solo. Kylo responds that he stabbed Han on sight and left him for dead. We then of course cut to Han in a Republic hospital. The nurse says that the lightsaber strike was perfectly placed to miss all his vital organs. Lord Santeca points out that with this break in security and attack on a high-profile general, they need to show a display of force with a full frontal attack. Leia counters that a full frontal attack is unnecessary when they have been, all things considered, relatively effective at monitoring and countering small-scale insurgent activity. Finn asks how they monitor this activity, and Leia says they have several space stations throughout the galaxy that monitor large sections of space to counteract piracy, trafficking, and terrorism. Finn asks how many people know their locations, and Leia says it's a closely guarded secret. Finn pushes the point by saying, but if they were able to find out where one is and take it out, Leia says, we'd lose our ability ability to police that area. Our control would be reduced to naught. We'd be completely, at which point Finn finishes her sentence, blinded. We then cut to the First Order fleet flying across the galaxy just to establish the danger. And it's at this point I want to stop and explain why this is my alternative to Starkiller Base. There are several problems with Starkiller Base, and these are they. 1. It's a rehash of A New Hope. 2. It's an example of the classic elevation that occurs in sequels, where things have to get bigger and bigger and bigger, which is hacky and short-sighted. 3. It makes the galaxy seem kind of unimportant, since these planets are just viewed as disposable. It conditions us to not care about each individual planet when we see 7 getting blown up all in one pop. 4. It positions the First Order as ridiculously powerful, which makes no sense at all. 5. It leaves the First Order incredibly exposed to an attack, since all of their resources are tied up in this one space station. And 6. It positions the film to end in a First Order defeat, since Starkiller Base has to be destroyed as it's so destructive, which makes no sense if the First Order is trying to overcome the Republic from a weaker position. What we want is something that the First Order can launch an assault on. We need to have this film end with a defeat for the good guys, to show that the First Order are a threat. But what can the First Order attack? A giant space weapon isn't something our good guys should possess. That's when it came to me, in the shower probably. A giant radar machine. By crippling this, the Republic would be blinded in that part of the galaxy, and disorder would take over, forcing them out and allowing separatists to fill the vacuum. What we have in the original plot is the First Order, which is the remnants of a defeated power, going up against the established government. The First Order then invests more resources into the fight than the Republic, and loses more resources, but somehow the First Order end up coming out of the whole thing victorious. This is the numbers problem I mentioned earlier. It makes the idea of bringing people over to your side or having a strong standing seem irrelevant, since anybody can just come along and blow up a few planets and totally change things overnight. So back to the film, the Republic generals all sat around in the war room discussing how exactly they're going to anticipate where the First Order will attack. Leia points out that the space stations have large cannons, making them hard to attack, so a large army would be needed to destroy one. Poe asks where the majority of their troops are, and Leia shows on the map that they are in an area surrounding the surveillance station at Fornax, where there's an ongoing conflict called the N26 conflict, so named after its position on a standard map of the galaxy. They conclude that this is where the First Order will attack, thus forcing the Republic to retreat from the area of the galaxy that they are most fiercely defending. Leia immediately contacts the local Iridonians to send reinforcements to the base. Meanwhile, we have a scene of soldiers getting ready for war. Leia reflects on how this will be the first major battle in decades, and nothing can prepare the soldiers for what lies ahead. We cut to the Iridonians flying down towards Fornax. The ship shakes, which they dismiss as turbulence. However, as they are let in by the guards and begin to disembark, a lightsaber ignites behind them, and Kylo Ren begins slaughtering them all, slicing into somebody as the scene transitions to. On the ship, heading from Biss, we see Han and Leia having a conversation similar to the one they have in the actual film. However, I'd switch them around. In the original, Leia is confident Kylo can be saved, while Han is less so. This makes it less impactful when Han dies. Therefore, in my version, Han would be very confident he can bring Kylo back to the light side, citing the way Kylo stabbed him to avoid killing him. Oh, I should also just say that in my version, they would still be separated. That makes sense to me after the trauma of having their son turn to the dark side, and I like the explanation that they remind each other of Kylo, and that's why they can't be together. So then the first wave of Republic troops arrive on Fornax, only to discover that rather than the full frontal assault they expected, the attack appears to be a small stealth mission, seeing all the dead guards lying around. They then realise that the full frontal assault is instead occurring on Iridonia. This is where I introduce a new concept I just made up. There is a minimum distance you have to travel in order to hyperdrive, and larger vessels have a larger minimum distance, because momentum and inertia and all that physics stuff. Therefore, they can't send the large troop transports to Iridonia from Fornax because they're too close together. Instead, they send a team of fighters led by Poe Dameron to help out. We then cut to the fight between the Iridonians and the First Order, just to get an idea of the destruction occurring, obviously not lingering on it too long since we don't really care about any of the people there. Next, we have the Republic troops, including Han Solo, Finn and Chewie, entering deep into the planet caverns. However, they are confronted by elite troops and we get a fun shootout. This is also our main opportunity to see Captain Phasma being a brutal badass. Meanwhile, Kylo is planting various charges throughout the facility. Then we cut to Rey being held captive in a ship. General Hux tells her that she will be allowed to live if she reveals the location of Luke Skywalker. Rey says that she doesn't know where he is, and Hux says that wouldn't surprise him since he suspects that Kylo was looking for an excuse to keep her alive. He picks up a gun and points it at her, saying she is a freak, just like Kylo. Meanwhile, Leia, in the midst of the battle, senses Rey's presence and instructs her crew to fire on the ship she's in to destroy the generators. Just as Hux is about to shoot Rey, the power cuts and in the dark confusion, Rey is able to run away. The ship begins to crash land and Leia instructs the cannons to not destroy the ship as Rey is on it. We briefly cut to Iridonia, where the planet is being destroyed. However, Poe Dameron shows up and engages in some dogfights before ultimately shooting down some troop transport ships. Back on Fornax, flashbacks, we see troops spill out of the wreckage, and the battle on the ground intensifies. Thousands of soldiers from both sides fall dead as lasers fly everywhere. Rey sneaks out and heads into a cavern for cover. Kylo finishes placing the charges as Han pursues him. This leads to Han confronting Kylo, while Rey, Finn, and Chewie watch. Just as in the original film, Han attempts to reason with Kylo, but this time Kylo kills him definitively. Leia, much closer to the action, is almost incapacitated by the shock. From here, things, as they occasionally have in this rewrite, play out very similar to the original. Our surviving main characters all end up on the surface. I don't really have a problem with Rey holding her own against Kylo, since Kylo is very angry and has been shot. I also like Max Landis' idea of having Kylo make it clear that he's so torn up over having killed his father that he actually wants to die.
And he goes, "Kill me! Come on, try! Kill me!" Except you slowly start to realize he's not just taunting them. He wants to die.
This would further justify why he wouldn't be on his best form. The main difference is that this duel is in the midst of a massive battle, and this is a massive battle. There are huge numbers of militants spilling out onto the planet, giant cannons exploding whole platoons, fighters dive bombing people. Now, in my version, Kylo does ultimately best Rey, but then he is knocked away by a stray blast. I was considering giving Mark Hamill what he wanted and having Luke show up here.
I remember thinking, when I got to the scene, I hope everyone's seen it, but when the lightsaber jiggles in the forest and flies out of the snow, I went, "Oh, baby, here I am." Where I thought I came in is when the lightsaber wiggles in the snow and flies out. I said, "Here I am, baby." In the forest, when the lightsaber goes like this and flies off, I said, "Oh, what a great entrance. Ah!" Rey caught it? She hasn't even been to Dagobah for training!
However, I really think that saving Luke until the next installment is a good idea. So the Millennium Falcon shows up and rescues Rey and Finn. Meanwhile, the First Order begins to retreat as the tide is turning against them, and Kylo is taken into a ship and flown away. Captain Phasma emerges from a cavern and effortlessly blasts away several Republic soldiers before getting into a fighter. Poe Dameron returns and there is an attempt to chase down the First Order, but as some fighters hold them off, much of the First Order is able to escape. The bad guys still on the planet are instructed to fight until the last man, and they begin to get gunned down. However, Rey cautions Leia that their surveillance abilities have been destroyed, so their only hope now is to inspire the people to believe the Republic is worth maintaining. The government troops hold back a bit and instruct the militants to stand down, which they do despite the protestations of their commanders. We begin to see the Republic troops move in and arrest the separatist forces. Then we get our standard epilogue scenes, which I'll just go through really quickly. There's a celebration on Iridonia, but ultimately the main characters come to the realization that this has been a serious loss for them, and they're likely to see the power of the Republic erode in this area. Meanwhile, Leia is obviously beyond consolation regarding Han's death. Kylo is confronted by Hux about the perceived failures of the mission, since so many men were lost. Phasma, however, defends the attack as having seriously undermined the Republic. Snoke says that the real concern is the survival of Rey. He says that Luke Skywalker must be killed, and then he goes on a bit of a monologue about the dangers of the Force awakening. Meanwhile, while this is happening, we see a hooded figure with a robot hand, it's Luke, knelt over Han's body, grieving. Then he gets up and leaves. That's how it ends. One thing I've rejected is the decision of The Force Awakens to end where the next film kicks off. I personally don't like that. One of the staples of Star Wars is that every time we come back for another story, there's always more things that have happened in the interim. There's new information to pick up. In The Force Awakens, we just go straight into the next film, and I can't really get behind that. So in this one, we just end with the revelation that Luke is out there, and that's our setup for the next film, The Last Jedi. Hey guys, jumping in with an addendum, I just wanted to do a brief conclusion addressing why I think this rewrite works. This may not be a complete list, but it covers some of the major differences. My audio setup is slightly different now. I don't know if it will make a difference, but if you've listened this far, I hope you wouldn't stop now just because the audio has got slightly worse. Anyway, so here's a brief review of some of the main changes. The Republic is actually portrayed as the Republic rather than the Rebellion 2.0, moving away from this film just feeling like a rehash of A New Hope. The First Order is portrayed as something other than the Empire 2.0. Again, not just a rehash of A New Hope. Indeed, I'm quite happy with how the First Order logically follows on from the original trilogy. They're not written to be ridiculously evil, they don't just blow up planets or brainwash people, but I hope they're maybe a bit more interesting because of that. On that note, in my version, Finn makes a lot more sense. Not only is the First Order not as mind-controlling in my version, but there is also a bit more time between when we first see Finn and when he eventually switches sides, which feels less stupid than him being an ex-Stormtrooper in The Force Awakens. In The Force Awakens, the fact he's a Stormtrooper really doesn't contribute much to the film at all. In my version, there are friendships within the First Order. The people get along with each other, so Finn's betrayal would mean something. In The Force Awakens, he's basically a faulty robot. The brainwashing of the First Order makes his decision to rebel feel less like a choice and more like a glitch. That isn't compelling. Poe Dameron, on the other hand, is very similar. He's still cocky, he's still highly skilled. Rey is also pretty similar. The main change is that she isn't as written to be as overpowered with the Force. I think she's much more relatable now since she isn't just perfect. I also tried to establish more of a Ben Kenobi-Luke relationship between Han and Rey to try and make Han's death a bit more impactful. I really like that we see Luke at the end mourning over Han's body. I don't think there was a way to write it so he actually witnessed Han's death, but I think this works just as well. Leia is of course very similar, although I'm happy that she's slightly closer to the action scenes, which substantiates her being a supposed general. Kylo Ren is pretty similar. His conflict between the dark side and the light is made a bit more obvious in this, but it was pretty obvious in the original too, and I think I kind of like it like that. Hux obviously is still only a minor character, but I like that he's more deceptive and evil in this, such as when he told Rey she'd live if she revealed the location of Luke, even though he previously told Kylo that he'd kill her no matter what. I also like that he literally hates the Force. When he says that Rey is a freak like Kylo, I hope the fact that he considers them to be freaks because he hates the Force was clear. There's a very obvious forthcoming conflict between him and Kylo set up too, and I believe that this allows Snoke to shine. My idea of Snoke is that he sort of just keeps people in line. He stops Hux and Kylo from butting heads too much, and he is able to exercise control by simply manipulating people. I hope this came across in the rewrite. Now, Phasma is one of the changes I'm most happy with. Even though she hardly appears at all, she is definitely set up as a really threatening character here. Obviously, she doesn't say or do much at first, but just looks cool. And then in the final action scene, obviously I can't show you the final action scene, but she would basically just be killing everyone. This way, we know she's going to show up again and be a meaningful antagonist. She does not get shoved in a trash compactor. I'm really pleased that I found a way to not have the film end with a massive space weapon. I'll just say some final things on the plot. There is a recurring theme in this film that the Force is awakening. We're told that the number of Force-sensitive people has declined, but they are growing in number. The location of Luke is very underdeveloped, but that is intentional. I already know what's going to happen in The Last Jedi. I've planned it all out. Most of all, I hope that this rewrite did a good job at showing how a relatively small threat at the beginning, the First Order, was able to present a serious threat to the Republic at the end. What I want is for the First Order to be a very genuine threat in the second film, without feeling ridiculous or just being reduced down to a giant space bazooka. Anyway, interruption done, so look forward to my rewrite of The Last Jedi. Like I say, I will do a rewrite of The Last Jedi, provided that this video is reasonably successful. The only reason I make this content is because I assume that people want to see it. So like, share, comment, and subscribe. That is the easiest way to guarantee you will see more of this in the future. I actually have a slightly different project coming up where I will be reviewing 15 movies over the course of 2 weeks. However, if you like this, then you should like that too, so subscribe. Also, I know that I do have subscribers who subscribe for politics. I'm taking a break. It's not going forever, but I was kind of just getting burnt out on the politics thing, and I figured, it will be coming. Oh, my throat. Thank you to my patrons Hannah Taylor, Kirsten, LRX89, Stephen, Nancy Diamond, Stephen Lester, and Rosemary Thurman. You are all very appreciated.